Welcome back. In today's video, we will be planting in our Vego garden self-watering tomato planter with trellis. And you won't need to have one of these to learn about two major points of failure for new gardeners. And that has to do with the understanding of garden soil. And the other is, after you have your garden soil in your container, how to take care of a potted plant that you transplant it into. So they all revolve around what we understand as soil, or for most new gardeners, the misconception of soil, because the way they're labeled on the bag is very confusing, and it took me at least a couple of seasons to figure this out. So if you're a new gardener, this is going to give you a really big head start, and may save you a lot of headache as you start your gardening. So first of all, when you go to your big box store, most typical gardeners would do that because it's accessible. You'll find products like these. For us in Southern California, there's a company called Kellogg Garden, and they have different types of soils that you can purchase, but they're actually not soils. They're actually soil amendment. They're more equivalent to dirt. If you're to buy soil from a bag, expect to pay 3 to 4 times the price of one of these bags. That's not to say that you can't start with this type of soil. For most gardeners, those really expensive bags are just way out of hand for us. So this is going to be, this video is geared towards most of us. And when we start a garden, we're going to be starting with this type of soil. Right off the bat, garden soil, this big bag, it's very enticing because for a big bag, you get a lot of soil. It's not soil. It's very far away from soil. These other bags, on the other hand, the potting soil, they are a lot closer to soil. What these are actually amendments, and amendments are basically nutrients that are still trapped in their larger form. So after a year or 2 years, and especially after the 3rd year, they become really expensive, 3-4 times the price of a bag type of soil. But that takes 3 to 4 years for that stuff, the soil in here, to break down. The other thing that's really misleading is when you look at the label of these products, they'll have things in there that are actual nutrients that plants can use, like bat guano, kelp meal, other types of poultry manures that are listed in here. And what I found is that while they're listed in here, the concentrations are pretty insignificant. So if we're to plant straight with this soil without adding additional amendments or fertilizers to it, our plants are going to fail. So this is a good, these types of soils are a good base. So we'll use that as base, and then we'll have to add in amendments and also fertilizer. So for me, fertilizer is something that is water soluble, some type of liquid fertilizer, either a fish emulsion or other fertilizers, whatever fertilizer you're comfortable with. It's usually in a liquid form. So with this self-watering planter, what's nice about it is, in theory, when you water, your water is going to stay in the tank and your nutrients are here. A lot of these soils have very porous material in them, like for instance perlite, and in some of these container soils, they have rice hulls, so the water just drains really quickly, and that's another point of failure, is your nutrients being leached out. So be really mindful about that when you water. If you have a traditional pot where the water leaches out, be mindful about that. We'll talk about that maybe later in this video or in a future video in this series. Just in the sake of time, for the sake of time, we're going to keep it very minimum today. So we're going to fill it up with a bag of this Patio Plus. Let me walk around in the front here a little bit. So we're going to skip this. This is not garden soil. This is actually an amendment to soil. I use it as a mulch. So we're going to want to use one of these bags of the container mixes. And for the Vego garden, I would recommend going with the Patio Plus. It has a little bit more stuff like peat and kelp meal. So if you're in a pinch, you can definitely use this, but you'll have to use more compost to make up for it. So let's grab one of these and head back to where we're gonna fill these planters. these are our Vego Garden self-watering planters, and I want to thank again Vego Garden for sending them over for me to try them out. This is a run and gun kind of usage, so I'm going to figure out where the strengths are and some of the areas that we need to make up for. So I'll be sharing any findings I have in this video series. So I removed the trellis so it's easier to work. Some of these other trellises are going to stay in place because they're holding back our espalier peach tree a little bit. So they're not going to come out today. We're going to fill this container with this patio plus soil. I have a couple of containers that are filled at different heights, and this is one planting style that works really well for us. And so I'm going to plant some tomatoes and a cucumber plant in here. And it's I'm going to fill this Vego, this last container here, to account for planting tomatoes. So just like this middle one here where I have it filled about halfway, I'm going to do that. I'm going to talk about why I do that. So let's fill it up. And these bags, if you grab a corner and you tear into it a little bit and get your thumb in there, and you can tear along the seams here and it rips out apart really easily. Make sure you save these bags. They're really good to reuse. They're super strong for if you do recycling. They hold the cans really well, and later on we may need to use these bags in the garden, especially if you're in a wet climate. You can use these bags, cut them up and act as an umbrella. So if you get a lot of rain, you can use it as an umbrella to keep your soil from getting waterlogged. Okay, so we have this container filled about halfway, and this is for tomato planting. And as I mentioned in the opening parts of this video, these bags of garden soil don't have all the nutrients that real soil has. They're not broken down to a point where the plant can take it up. So we need to add some stuff to it. And I like to use the Espoma brand of garden amendments. It's a good value. There are different brands out there. Here in our Southern California market, this is a very good purchase. In your area, it's probably going to be a different brand. So in this hole, I'm going to put in 2 handfuls, or I should say per container, 2 handfuls. And the particle size of this amendment will show you that it has different stages of nutrient availability. So the larger chunks, obviously the plant's not going to be able to take up. But if they're too small, then they become water soluble and they get leached away. So that's why it's nice to get these types of amendment. They're also known as slow release. And the nutrient leaching is probably not too big of a problem with these self-watering containers because the water is held in here, and if you don't overwater the containers to a point where they overflow and flow out, then your nutrients are going to stay in here. And this is the first time I'll be planting in a self-watering container using potting soil. This is something that the company Vego Garden says that you can use. In the past, I've used other types of self-watering containers, and they use peat moss and perlite, and in that situation it's essentially hydroponics, and that's a different way of growing. All right, so I'm going to mix this up and get our plants in there. Let's mix this one up too. This soil is a little bit drier because I was just testing the container, so we'll have to make sure to keep an eye on it, make sure it's nice and moist. So the first plant that's going to go in is the what is this one? I'm blanking out on the name. Black Prince tomato. So this is a medium-sized dark tomato, It does well in the early seasons or cold climates. For us here in Southern California, early spring is what I regard as is equivalent to a cold climate. So that means we can grow this very early. One thing you'll notice about the root ball is that we grew this tomato in real soil. So we can essentially plop this in here and bury the plant to the neck. So we're going to plop this in here. Going to put it in the center. It looks very deep. It looks very weird, but this is a really good way to plant tomatoes because they can handle having the roots really deep. And down here is where all your nutrients and your water is, and it's also very stable. So you're not going to see fluctuations with your plants, especially with tomato blossom end rot. A lot of the misnomers about that is it's a calcium deficiency. There's plenty of calcium in the soil. So what that is what blossom end rot, BER, is actually plant stress. And when you have changes in your weather, your plants can get stressed. You can buffer those changes with soil and by planting them deep. So this is a good way to plant it. We're going to backfill this tomato plant some more, all the way to the neck. Again, we can do it because this soil is essentially the same soil as this potting soil here. So I'm going to fill that up. Going to get some more of this amendment, sprinkle it around, and then I'm going to backfill some more. Afterwards, I'm going to water it in real good. So I'm going to water it in real good once, and then we'll just leave it and see if it needs more watering. But with this self-watering container, it should take care of all of that. Okay, this next planter here, I'm going to be planting a sun gold tomato, and this is one that Vego Garden sent over. You can buy seedlings from them. And when plants are grown in a commercial setting, they're grown with peat moss and perlite. And I'm looking at this, and I do see some garden soil in there, so there's bits of wood mulch in there, and it has peat in there. So essentially, peat is a very different type of soil composition than real soil or even the bag soil. And where its biggest difference is in this thing called, I'm blanking out on the name. It has to do with how it holds or doesn't hold water. Hydrophobic. So when this root ball dries out, it's very difficult to get wet again. You essentially have to soak it. When you water your soil here, the water will just leach away and it doesn't hit this root ball and it dries out. And this is where many gardeners, including myself, run into trouble with. This is also why they say you got to loosen up the roots, so that way the roots can kind of reach some of that water, but it doesn't really account for the difference in the soil. So what do? When you go and you plant a plant that you get from the nursery in this type of peat moss, you have to water at the base until the root spreads out into your soil. At that point, then you can disregard. So we're gonna have to do two things. When we put this in here, we're gonna have to keep a close eye on this plant. Even in a self-watering container situation, we have to keep a close eye on the plant and also on the soil. You'll see that the soil is going to be a lighter color. That means it's drier, it's getting dry, so you have to make sure you water at the base. So unlike this plant where we have the soil that we grew our tomato plant in real soil, we can't bury this at the neck yet. We have to bury it soil level so that we can see and water directly into this root ball. So that's what we're gonna do over here. Put that straight in the middle, and then we're gonna put it right around there. And here, we have to compact the soil. Unlike over here, we don't really need to worry about compacting the soil. When we water, the soil will compact it. But here, we've got to make sure we compact it. By compacting it, it kind of mimics the same soil density as the root ball. So that's what we're gonna do in that one. So we're done on that. We'll water that in later. In this other planter, I hope you can see me. The last one here, we're going to be planting a national pickling cucumber, and if you're a seasoned gardener, you're thinking about some spacing issues, we're going to figure that out as we go along. So we may need to move these apart if we run into spacing issues where the plants grow on top of each other and block out each other's sunlight. So that's one nice thing about these planters, we can move them. Here, I'm going to mix in the amendment that we have, the holly tone, the Espoma holly tone, and we're going to put our plant. We don't necessarily need to put it straight in the middle, because I want to reserve some room in the front to plant some things like parsley that we have back there. So we're going to do that with this guy. And once again, you have to really check out the root ball and see what type of soil medium it is. This is real soil. We could put this down here, in there like this. I'm going to push around here a little bit. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fill it up with more soil. Cucumber plants, they can take a little bit of the deep planting if you have the same soil accounted for. So let's get in there with some additional soil. And we don't really need to fill this up all the way, because this container has a lot of room for the cucumber plants to stretch its roots. It's not going to take up all the space, that this 1 cubic volume of space here. I'm just going to fill it up so that the parsley that we're going to plant in here can be a little bit higher and see more sunlight, because where I'm at, we don't get as much sunlight. As you can see behind me, it's a retaining wall, and the sunlight's not going to come through from that side. So all the sun's coming on this side, and I want this to be as high as possible for the parsley plant. So let's get this filled up with soil here. And herbs don't really need too much nutrients, but it doesn't hurt to give it to them. So we're going to amend it with a little bit of more of that garden amendment. And one of the things I want to do on my channel is also to standardize some of the definitions, like what the difference between amendments and fertilizer is. For me, amendment is something that is nutrient potential. It's not available right away. Fertilizer is something that's available right away. And just like with your body, when you eat that food that's in your stomach, the nutrients and the sugars is not available right away, and you actually need it stored in there so that you can carry yourself through the day. If you just had a sudden influx of sugars, then that's too much and your body can't handle it. It'll just get rid of it, and then you're depleted. So that's the same thing for soil. It's like your gut, your stomach. And so you need a mix of things that break down over time, but you also need energy when you need it, and that's fertilizer. And then amendment is stuff that breaks down over time, and that's what you need. All right, where's our parsley plant? It's back here. Let's get it in here, and I'll plant it right here in the corner. This is just a flat leaf parsley, and it's one I selected, and Vego was able to send it over. It's got really good roots. Let's stick it right here. In a budget sense, growing herbs is probably the best bang for the buck. They're easy to grow. They are super convenient to have. You could just come out to the garden, harvest it as you need it, and at the market they command a pretty hefty price per pound. And oftentimes it's with fresh herbs, it's good to have it nice and fresh from the garden. That's when the aromas are the strongest, before all that is evaporated. I think we're done. So we'll water the plants in. Let me come back to this plant here. So we want it to grow for at least a week. Here in Southern California, our sunlight and our warm weather lets our plants grow really quickly. I imagine in a colder climate, you might have to wait a couple of weeks before you start to backfill your tomato plant so that the soil will give volume for the roots to grow into, to hold on nutrients, to let the nutrients break down for the roots over time. And also the additional soil will help with the plant's stability as it grows taller. Although we have these cages here, these trellises here that'll keep them in here, it does help to have that soil to help with it from flopping over and bending and breaking the main stem. We also have 3 floor plants in here, and I'm going to actually snip them away after this video is over. If you want to, as an insurance policy, leave 1 or 2 to see how it does. Sometimes dampening off can happen to new gardeners, so you probably want to save 1 or 2. But with experience, you know how to set up your plants so that they don't get dampening off disease. So we're going to water this in, and then I'm going to put our trellis back on. Even though we don't need the trellis right now because the plants are still very young, the trellis helps protect them from animals that want to go in there like raccoons and dig them out. And if you have any questions for me, feel free to ask them in the comments below, and I'll try my best to answer them. If it's a really good question, I'll save it for a future video. I'll answer it and also address it in a future video as well. We got our planters filled with garden soil, and now they're filled also with plants, and they should take off pretty soon, especially here in Southern California with our sunny climate. Although today is overcast, which is perfect for filming this video, makes for good lighting that makes it easier for you to see without shadows and such. So in this video, I went over 2 major pitfalls for beginning gardeners. And those are the misconceptions about the soil that you buy, and also the nuances of transplanting a potted plant. The garden soil, as most beginning gardeners and most people know, plants grow from soil. However, the stuff that we buy is oftentimes amendment, and it takes about 3 years before that breaks down to become the really nice, expensive soil that you can buy. If you're tight on budget, start with the garden soil that are in these bags. And you can even buy worm castings as an amendment, or you can even buy those nice fancy soils and add it in here as a compost. There are lots of ways that you can add nutrients to your soil, your garden soil, and grow big healthy plants with. The last thing that we're going to be doing maybe in a few days is to add some liquid-based amendments or fertilizer into it, like a fish emulsion. And again, use whichever one that you're comfortable with. They can even be the synthetic fertilizer, but use that with just a little bit. I'm not here to judge. We all grow different ways based on our wallets and our abilities. The second major pitfall or point of failure for new gardeners is that hydrophobic properties of those plants that you purchase to transplant in there. So again, if you do a transplant, make sure you plant it level, and then watch that root ball moisture. You can see when it dries out, it becomes this lighter brown color. Here with these self-watering containers, I imagine that the moisture in here is going to be pretty consistent, and that we don't have to watch it too much. We just have to make sure we plant it level. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on that, and I'll report in a future video in this Vego garden self-watering tomato planter series. And with that, we'll see how these planters work, and I'm going to be coming back with updates, so be sure to check in and see how they're doing. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them for you. And if there's a lot of interest, well, that will be a topic for future video in this series. I hope you find this video helpful, even as a gardener, an experienced gardener. I know that this tomato planting technique is not very common, and I've used it for many years and it grows well for us. And as I explained earlier in the video, how it helps with making sure your plant is resilient during the weather spikes. That's really key to happy plants. If you find that helpful and you feel like someone can benefit from that, please share this video with them and have them check out this and try out this planting method. So until next time, thank you again for checking our video, and we'll see you in the next one.